Okay, let's dive straight in. Today we're looking at something really cool, a visual puzzle that tells us a surprising amount about, well, how we see things. It's a Kanizsa Triangle.
Ah, yes, the famous one.
Exactly. The one of three sort of Pac-Man shapes arranged just so.
And boom.
Yeah, boom. Your brain just fills in this bright white triangle. But it's not actually drawn there.
Gaetano Canissa made it famous back in the 70s. And yeah, it's simple, but it really opens up some deep questions.
Totally. So that's our mission for this deep dive.
Hmm.
Why do our brains do that? What does this illusion reveal about how we, construct our reality?
And it touches on so much philosophy, psychology, especially Gestalt stuff, neuroscience, even things like AI design and art. It's surprisingly far-reaching.
Right. We've pulled together material from all those angles: philosophical takes, brain span studies, Gestalt principles, how it's used in the real world. So let's start with that big question. Why see something that isn't there? That feels like a good place for philosophy, maybe.
Definitely. I mean, think about how you actually experience seeing. Is it just like light hitting your eyes?
Well, that's part of it, obviously.
Sure, but philosophers like Merleau-Ponty, they argued it's much more active than that. Perception isn't just passive receiving like a camera. It's more like an active engagement with the world.
Okay. So the Kanizsa Triangle isn't just a glitch.
Exactly. It's not an error message from your eyes. It's your mind actively constructing a visible world where that triangle makes sense. It's filling in the blanks to create a coherent picture, even if the lines aren't literally on the page.
So it's a feature, not a bug, of how we see.
Precisely. Merleau-Ponty might say that these illusions only really work because we fundamentally trust the world around us is real and stable.
Ah, okay. So we assume things are whole and complete.
Right. And our brain works to fit the incoming data into that assumption. The triangle appears because it's the simplest, most coherent interpretation of those Pac-Man shapes against that trusted background. Our consciousness isn't a perfect photo,
Yeah.
well, it's a constructed experience.
That makes sense. We're always pattern matching, trying to make things logical. And doesn't Daniel Dennett have a similar kind of idea about consciousness being interpretation?
Yeah, Dennett's perspective fits well here. He talks about consciousness not being like a single picture in your head, but more like the result of many different interpretive processes running in parallel, like multiple drafts of a story.
Okay. So with the Kanizsa Triangle.
There's no little person inside your brain drawing the lines, right?
Yeah.
Instead, Dennett would say it's the outcome of all these competing editing processes across different brain areas. The perception of the triangle emerges from that complex activity. No single step is the seeing. The whole system produces the experience.
And the fact that basically everyone sees it, that must mean these constructing mechanisms are pretty fundamental, baked in.
Seems like it. It suggests these ways of interpreting the world are deeply shared, probably rooted in our biology and how we interact physically with our environment. Our brains are all running similar visual software, you could say.
Okay, that philosophical angle sets the stage nicely. But how does the brain actually do the trick? That feels like Gestalt psychology territory, right?
Absolutely. The Kanizsa Triangle is almost like a textbook demonstration of Gestalt ideas.
Because Gestalt is all about seeing the whole picture, not just the parts.
Exactly that. Our minds have this strong tendency to organize sensory input into unified wholes. We look for order, for completeness. The law of closure is huge here.
Right. Closure, we see incomplete things as complete.
Yes, we mentally fill in the gaps. So with the Kanizsa figure, you don't just see three separate Pac-Men. Your brain says, aha. The simplest explanation is a whole triangle sitting on top, blocking parts of those circles.
It just jumps to that conclusion.
It does. Kafka, another Gestalt guy, talked about how a closed line creates a figure, separating it from the background. Closure in the Kanizsa illusion essentially creates that perceived triangular figure out of those disconnected notches. It becomes one thing.
And it's not just closure doing the work, is it? I feel like other Gestalt things are involved too.
Oh, for sure. Several principles team up. There's good continuation, our tendency to see smooth, flowing lines. The edges of the Pac-Men seem to point along smooth lines that form the triangle sides.
Makes sense. They lined up nicely.
Then there's pregnance, or good form. We prefer simple, stable, symmetrical shapes. A triangle is a much simpler, better form than three odd Pac-Men just sitting there aimlessly.
Okay. And what about figure ground?
Crucial. We automatically separate objects, figure from their background. Here, the illusory white triangle pops out as the figure seeming brighter and closer, appearing in front of the Pac-Man even though nothing is physically overlapping.
Right, it looks like it's covering them up.
Exactly. The brain infers depth and layering. And it's interesting, like you said, if you twist those Pac-Men around so their mouths face outwards, forming crosses,
The triangle disappears.
gone, which really proves the Gestalt point. The overall arrangement, the global configuration is what matters. It's not just the pieces, it's how they fit together.
And Kanizsa himself, he made a distinction, didn't he, between the bit you actually see and the bit you just kind of infer.
Yes, modal versus amodal completion. That's a key insight.
Modal and amodal. Okay, break that down.
So, modal completion is when you perceive an illusory contour that seems to have brightness or texture, like that bright white edge of the main Kanizsa triangle.
Yeah.
Your brain is visually adding something.
Okay, I see that edge.
Right. Amodal completion is when you infer the rest of a shape that's hidden without actually seeing its edge. Think about the circles behind the triangle. You know they're complete circles, right? Even though you can't see the covered parts. That's a modal completion.
Ah, okay. So one is a visible illusion. The other is more like a logical inference about hidden parts.
Precisely. And we do this amodal completion constantly in everyday life whenever something's partly blocked from view. The Kanizsa figure just makes both processes really obvious.
So our brain is constantly filling in blanks using these Gestalt rules. Okay, let's get technical. What's actually happening inside our heads, neuron-wise? What's neuroscience?
This is where it gets really fascinating. Neuroscientists have actually found brain areas that seem specialized for dealing with these illusory contours.
Really? Like cells that see the illusion?
Pretty much. Early studies, often in macaque monkeys because their visual systems are similar to ours, found neurons in an area called V2.
V2, okay, second visual area.
Exactly. And neurons there fire when shown a Kanizsa figure, almost as if a real physical edge was present right where the illusory contour is perceived. It's like the cells themselves are reporting the illusion.
Wow. So they're reacting to a ghost edge. What about V1, the first stop for visual info?
V1's role is a bit more debated. Some studies do show V1 activity related to the illusory contour, but is it generating it or is it getting feedback from V2 telling it the contour is there? That's the question.
The feedback loop idea.
Right. Some techniques like optical imaging and direct recordings have often shown stronger, perhaps earlier, responses specifically to the Kanizsa edges in V2 compared to V1. There was a key study back in '84 by von der Heydt showing this quite clearly. So V2 seems to be a really important player, maybe initiating the contour completion.
Okay, so V2 jumps on it. What about human brain scans, like fMRI? Do they show something similar?
Yes, human fMRI studies broadly support this. They consistently find a specific pattern in the early visual cortex V1 and V2. The brain regions that map to where the illusory triangle is seen show increased activity,
Okay, makes sense.
while the regions mapping to the actual physical Pac-Man shapes, the inducers, often show decreased activity.
Huh, less activity for the real things. Why?
Well, one interpretation is predictive coding. The idea is the brain predicts the triangle as the best explanation for the input. Once it settles on that prediction, it doesn't need to process the Pac-Man as intensely. The triangle explains away the input.
So, got it. It's a triangle. Don't need to sweat the details of those Pac-Man anymore.
Kind of, yeah. And again, many fMRI studies point to V2 and surrounding areas showing stronger activation for these illusions compared to V1. A recent paper even quantified it, saying the Kanizsa effect magnitude was significantly greater in V2.
So V2 is definitely a hotspot. Any other areas involved?
Oh, yes. Higher level areas that deal with object recognition, like the lateral occipital complex or LOC, they light up too. This suggests a top-down influence.
Top-down, meaning?
Meaning the brain's understanding of shapes and objects influences how the earlier areas, like V1 and V2, process the raw data. Your knowledge that triangles exist helps solidify the perception. Some analyses suggest this dynamic loop, a conversation between higher and lower visual areas, refining the perception.
It sounds like a whole network is involved, not just one spot.
Absolutely. And at the cellular level, there are interesting ideas too, like the role of end-stopped cells.
End-stopped. What do they do?
They're neurons sensitive to the ends of lines or edges. One model suggests the curved edges of the Pac-Man activate these cells where the lines stop. And the pattern of activation across these end-stop cells might effectively signal the presence of an implied straight edge connecting the edge of the illusory triangle. This signal could then propagate within V1 or via feedback from V2.
So the line endings themselves provide clues.
Exactly. It's this interplay between local cues line ends, the T-junctions where the Pac-Man seems to meet the triangle, and the global context, how far apart the Pac-Man are, which part seems like the object versus the background. If you space the Pac-Man too far apart, for instance,
The illusion breaks down.
right, the context changes. And get this, recent fMRI work even shows that the orientation of the illusory triangle, which way it's pointing, is encoded in the patterns of activity across populations of neurons in V1.
Wow, so it's represented very precisely, even early on.
It really suggests a detailed neural representation of something that isn't physically there.
Yeah.
So yeah, summing it up, seeing the Kanizsa Triangle engages this whole cascade, from bottom-up edge detection mechanisms to top-down object completion and interpretation across multiple visual areas.
It's really incredible the complexity behind such a simple visual effect.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't just a neurological curiosity, is it? There are practical implications for understanding this stuff.
For sure. Take AI and computer vision. Building machines that can see as flexibly as humans is a huge challenge.
Especially dealing with incomplete information, right? Like objects being partly hidden.
Exactly. The Kanizsa effect is a great test case for that. It's inspired models trying to replicate this perceptual completion. Early neural networks, like Fukushima's neocognitron way back, tried to build in mechanisms to handle occlusion, partly inspired by these ideas.
And more recently, are today's AI models getting better at this?
Well, researchers are testing current deep learning networks, the big ones like VGG16 or Dennett, on Gestalt principles. And yes, some studies show these networks can exhibit a kind of closure effect under certain conditions. They seem to learn to complete fragmented shapes, to some extent.
That's cool. So AI is learning to fill in the blanks.
Sort of. But it also highlights the gaps. Even sophisticated AI often struggles with closure and occlusion in messy real-world scenes compared to humans. Understanding the brain's tricks, the feedback loops, the grouping rules is actually super valuable for designing better, more robust AI vision systems. Seeing where AI fails tells us a lot.
Right, it shows us what human vision does so effortlessly. What about design? Like graphic design or interface design?
Oh, absolutely central. Designers use Gestalt principles like closure all the time, often intuitively. Think about logos, the IBM logo with its horizontal stripes. Your brain completes the letters.
Yeah, you don't need the full outline.
Exactly. It relies on closure. In web design, app interfaces, designers use proximity, similarity, closure to group-related buttons or information, making layouts clean and easy to grasp quickly. It guides your eye.
So they're basically hijacking these natural brain processes.
Pretty much. Leveraging how our perception automatically organizes things. And it goes beyond screens. Artists from centuries ago to modern op art use implied lines and Kanizsa-type figures to suggest form, depth, movement with minimal actual lines. Architects, product designers do it too, using alignments to suggest shapes or surfaces. It engages the viewer actively.
It really is everywhere once you start looking for it.
Yeah.
Okay, you also mentioned earlier that studying these illusions can tell us something about different brain conditions.
Yes, that's another really interesting angle. How people with certain conditions perceive illusions can shed light on the underlying brain differences. Take autism spectrum disorder, ASD. There are theories about differences in how context is processed.
Okay.
So a recent fMRI study looked at Kanizsa perception in teenagers with ASD versus controls. And intriguingly, they found no significant difference in the early visual cortex responses. The V1-V2 pattern of activation for the illusion versus the inducers was similar in both groups.
Really, so that initial completion process seems intact.
It suggests that, yeah, at least certain aspects of that spatial contextual completion in vision seem preserved. It challenges some simpler ideas about global processing differences.
Fascinating. What else?
Studies on split brain patients are also revealing, where the connection between the brain's two hemispheres is cut, often to treat epilepsy.
Right. What happens if they see a Kanizsa figure?
If you show it so only one hemisphere sees it, both hemispheres seem capable of completing the illusory shape independently. But there's some evidence the right hemisphere might be slightly better or more specialized in inferring the background shape that's being occluded, hints at hemispheric specialization.
So maybe the two sides handle different aspects of the scene interpretation.
Possibly. And more generally, illusions like this help distinguish between unconscious perceptual processing and conscious awareness. Someone with certain types of brain damage, like visual agnosia, might not be able to consciously report seeing the triangle, but their visual cortex might still show the neural signature of completing it.
So the processing happens even without conscious recognition.
Exactly. And there's even a potential link, though speculative, to things like pathological hallucinations.
Like in Charles Bonnet syndrome, seeing things that aren't there.
Right. Some researchers wonder if maybe that involves an overactive filling in or completion mechanism. Studying how these mechanisms work in normal illusions like Kanizsa gives us a baseline to compare against, to understand how the brain might generate perceptions without external input.
Wow. So this simple triangle, it really connects the dots between philosophy, psychology, brain cells, AI, design, even clinical conditions.
It's quite amazing, isn't it? How wrestling with why we see this non-existent triangle forces us to confront these fundamental questions about perception, reality, and how our brains make sense of it all. It really encapsulates the active, constructive nature of seeing.
Well, this has been a fantastic deep dive. It's truly mind-bending how a few strategically placed Pac-Men can tell us so much about the way our brains build the world we experience.
It really underscores that perception isn't just receiving information, it's creating it. Which maybe leaves a final thought for you listening. How often are you filling in the blanks every day? Not just visually, but in understanding conversations, situations, people. What other simple everyday things might actually be windows into how our minds work in profound ways?